I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the synergy between mushrooms and comedy.
Well, I'll take you one step further and talk about like psychedelics and creativity. With psilocybin specifically, I've been microdosing for maybe 6 years. The biggest benefits I've gotten with psilocybin in regards to comedy are that specific substance helps me navigate thoughts in a way that I hadn't before. When I first started taking a microdose of psilocybin, I would be able to become a conscious observer easier and with a bit more grace.
Welcome to Into the Multiverse, a podcast brought to you by Supermush, where we believe that mushrooms can actually change the world, and that if humans mirrored the magic and wisdom of the fungi kingdom, we would have a far more joyous and connected planet. Each week, we'll be meeting with thought leaders and experts to extract the best insights and stories across everything from functional fungi, psychedelic medicine, and so much more. Thanks for listening. Step into the multiverse with us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Into the Multiverse. I'm really excited about this because of two reasons. One is that we tried to schedule this before. Do you remember what had happened the first time we tried to schedule
when
this?
It was going to be either mine or yours?
Basically, I'm sitting here on my couch with Brent Pella, and the first time we tried to schedule this podcast, both of us thought we were recording each other's
the
podcast.
other one? Yeah.
And I checked the day before.
Yeah.
And anyways, we ended up getting it rescheduled. And then we had a call around a week ago because I had reached out to you about Supermush, about doing Supermush stuff. We ended up getting on the call and you thought Supermush was psychedelic the whole time.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I realized we've just been swirling in this world of like massive misunderstandings.
Yeah, just so much misinformation.
So much misinformation. And so we're here to clear a lot of that up.
Yeah. And I'm grateful too. I'm grateful because I want to see you as an ally.
I want to see you as an ally.
Okay.
Yes.
I also thought that your name was pronounced Ally. So with just so much disinformation, and I apologize for that. But we're here now, and that's what matters.
This podcast is going to hopefully inspire a lot of clarity across the board. No, but I'm really, really excited to talk to you for real.
Cool.
Because comedy is one of my favorite things in the world. And I've been in the process of deep stalking you on the internet.
Thank you.
In preparation for this podcast, which is probably one of the most fun assignments that I've ever had.
Oh, good. Okay, cool. Because it'll either be fun or like maddening. And I'm glad that you seem to be in good spirits.
So fun. I've been such a fan of your work for a while.
Thank you.
And we recently got reconnected at a friend's ranch party.
Yeah.
So, we got to meet in person then, and I got to become more familiar with what you're up to. And my basic understanding of your bio, which please fill in any gaps for me, is you are a comedian, storyteller, filmmaker, and your videos have over 500 million views on the internet. Is that correct?
Yeah,
is that the latest statistic?
Yeah, and that's like, it's kind of a guess, but I kind of know just because friends have told me that sometimes videos get picked up and put on, eBaum's World, which is still around. Shout out to eBaum's World. That website raised me more than my own father. But on these random sites, sometimes I'll look and it'll have like 30 million views. And I'm like, yo, cool. Pay me. And no money comes from it. But that's okay because 30 million views means hopefully a couple million smiles. And that's really the goal.
Wow. I love that. I mean, there's... That's a good tagline for your website.
Yeah. What, pay me or
both,
smiles are the goal?
But the whole thing, I think
I think pay me. I think I'll go with pay me as my new slogan. Yeah.
And so, one of the things that I was thinking about in preparation for this episode, most of what I want to talk to you about is about mushrooms, and mushrooms are like comedy. And so I started this whole, brain spiral, if you will, of going into, and I looked this also up because I was really curious, and I've been very interested in what laughter does to the brain. And what laughter and comedy does to brain chemistry is actually very similar to what mushrooms holistically, both functional and psychedelic, do to your brain. And so I want to get into the weeds of all of that because I find it really fascinating that these are, one is a completely different modality, one is ingesting a substance, but you're actually creating this deep state of presence, open-mindedness, neuroplasticity. You're activating different levels of dopamine and serotonin in the brain. And so I want to get your thoughts on all of that. But I first want to start with a little bit of backstory so people have context on you.
Cool.
When did you first realize that you were funny?
I'm still trying to figure it out. People tell me and I go along with it. But, you know, I was raised by a single mom. I grew up with a single mom up in Davis, California, Northern California. And so she was kind of like my first audience. And she raised me. She was young when she had me. She was in her early 20s. So she raised me on like old school SNL, the Chris Farley era, the Adam Sandler era. So I grew up watching all those guys, as well as, you know, Whose Line Is It Anyway, and the Molly Shannon movies back then. And that kind of informed a lot of my silliness and what I did as a kid to be silly for my mom and for my family. And that continued up through, you know, hanging out with friends. In your friend group, there's always the funny guys. I was never the funny guy in my friend group. I still have friends that I grew up with that I think are way funnier than I am in the friend group setting. But we were all still like silly growing up. My friend group in junior high, my friend group in high school, everybody bags on each other. Everybody roasts each other. And it always came from such a genuine place that nobody ever bullied anyone else. It was more just like a camaraderie sense around like making fun of each other and just being funny and silly all the time. And so that had a big inspiration on me too, that I took into high school, started making silly short videos in like film class with some friends. And then in college, kept doing that a little bit more. And then I never really paid attention to what I was doing with a sense of the long term of what these silly videos could become. And so I think that naivete allowed me to continue to grow because of actually a lack of self-awareness in what I was doing. Like if I was hyper-focused on, I got to make a video so I can get to this thing, so I could get to this thing, then I think that would have sapped some of my creativity in a way. So yeah, to answer your question, I never really had a moment where I was like, I'm funny. But I always just thought I love trying to be funny. And if I can be funny and people laugh at me, then I guess I am. And so I'll just continue following that. And so that's what carried me into like the open mic scene and doing sketch comedy when I moved to LA, all the way up until now.
It's cool to hear how the lack of awareness that it was going to become a career actually took the guardrails off your creativity. And I
think that happens for a lot of artists too. I would assume is you kind of have to have that naive sense of not entitlement, but there's a certain level of naive optimism, I guess, especially in the stand-up comedy world where it's all up to you. You're a one-man band. You're not relying on any other players on stage or a director or a producer or anybody. It's just you. And if I had known maybe how hard it was going to be, I might not have started doing open mics, you know, because I really didn't know. I had no idea. And I played sports my whole life too. So my sense of like competition with myself and wanting to get better also played into starting out and doing stand-up and continuing to do it. But I feel like I would guess that for all or many artists, having that naive sense of optimism, removes the guardrails on creativity. So you can just be weird and throw a bunch of shit at the wall and see what sticks. And so that was a fun way to start. And I'm still throwing shit at the wall. I'm still trying to figure it out in a big way.
The thing that I like the most about comedy, and your videos fall into this category, is they're so funny and they're so strange, and they're calling out these, massive, sticky, very stigmatized points in culture, and enables your brain to look at them with a sense of levity. And I can imagine that's the experience you have doing stand-up, but it's healing. Comedy is really healing in a lot of ways. And I'm curious what you've seen, and you guys go for it. The people that you work with, you really like lean into the immediate stuff that's going on, especially in the political landscape. And I'm curious what you've seen be healing about that, just from expanding people's mind to look at the ridiculousness of some of the stuff that we're all up in arms about.
It's, I didn't do a lot of topical or current event related comedy or content until 2020. And when COVID hit, I kind of flipped everything I was doing upside down because I couldn't tour. So I tripled down on videos, and the news cycle was moving so fast. There was so many new things to be mad about, like on an almost daily basis. And I decided to start talking about trending topics and cultural issues as a way to build my own understandings of what was happening and build my own opinions that instead of abiding by whatever a mainstream narrative was, or instead of being headline fluent, people that only speak in headlines. I wanted to develop a better understanding of bigger topics that were happening in the world. And it's fun to offer something to people that has the potential to change how they look at a situation, a topic, a trending item in the news. Because sometimes it makes them mad. Some people really don't like thinking outside of their limited scope of belief or opinion. But I've gotten a lot of messages from people and people that come up to me after shows and just out on the street sometimes thanking me for, talking about certain subjects in a different way than other people do. And that's cool because I'm talking about things in the way that I want to talk about them. And so I think having a different approach toward talking about trending items and issues is like fresh to people. It's fresh to people because these days we see so much like tribalism and so much just blind agreement with different things on all sides of the political spectrum, on all sides of different trending culture. You have these wildly different opinions that are so rooted in people's brains that it's hard for them to even view or respect their opposition, let alone understand where their opposition is coming from. And that's like a choose your topic type of thing, whether it's abortion or legalizing drugs or the economy, whatever. There's always going to be people on completely opposite ends that have no ability or want to see the issue from somebody else's opinion. So I actively try to approach those topics in a way that can kind of break through that barrier because I want to break it through for myself. I want to see shit differently. I don't want to just agree with everything that somebody from CNN or Fox says. I want to figure out what I think about it. So the hope is that that'll help people kind of chip away at their own blocks toward understanding or talking about certain topics. But at the end of the day, if it ends up being just something silly that they can laugh at, then the mission is accomplished. Because first and foremost, what I do is with the intention to make people laugh. I'm not trying to change the world through altering the way people engage with news topics. I just kind of want to make people laugh at a dick joke every once in a while. That's item number one. Anything after that is a blessing. If anybody can get more than laughter from what I do, that's incredible and amazing. But the first goal is laughter. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that analogy. And also the both are similar, where laughter, what it actually does to your brain chemistry, and also expanding your mind to look at a topic differently. Mm-hmm. It's activating the same receptors. Like the analogy I was painting in the beginning, I'd love to hear what your thoughts on this are as a segue to talking about psychedelics and mushrooms and their role in your life, because psilocybin, which is the psychoactive part of magic mushrooms, people that listen to this podcast know that.
Are you sure? Do you guys know that? Have you ever heard the term psilocybin?
Once or twice. Okay. Or we might have some new people. We have some new people here.
They know there's a C in it?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. They know it's PSI at first? PSI. Okay, great.
My mom still can't say it. She's listened. She's getting over beading able to say it. She called it psilocybin for a really long time.
Not far off.
It's kind
of a cool name.
It's really comical.
Psilocybin is headlining Coachella next year. So
right?
Yeah, that should be dope.
It feels like a new drug development company. So what psilocybin does to your brain is it removes you from your default mode network, where you're able to make, that's where you make all your habit loops and decisions, and it creates this flood of neuroplasticity, and you're connecting new neural pathways that haven't been used before. And laughter and comedy do the same thing. And I actually, upon reflection of, I've had such a variety of psychedelic experiences that I've been blessed to have. And there is a lot of conversation right now, which I know it's an area we're both passionate about these macrodosing at service centers and the policies around that and the clinical trials around psychedelics. And yet, some of the most healing experiences that I've had in both my personal life and that I'm surrounded with in my community, because I work with a lot of people and their, psychedelic journey, integration and things like that, is laughing on mushrooms with your friends. And there's something really powerful to that. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on the synergy between mushrooms and comedy.
Yeah. Well, I'll take you one step further and talk about like psychedelics and creativity, because that's really the world that I'm trying to learn more about. With psilocybin specifically, I've been microdosing for maybe 6 years on and off on this protocol that has me on for a couple weeks, off for a couple weeks, and then I'll take months off, then I'll go a couple weeks on. It varies based on me communicating with my mind, body, and spirit and deciding what I need for whatever current chapter I'm in. But the biggest benefits I've gotten with psilocybin in regards to comedy are that specific substance helps me navigate thoughts in a way that I hadn't before. When I first started taking a microdose of psilocybin, I would be able to become a conscious observer easier, and with a bit more grace, I guess you could say. And by conscious observer, I mean, instead of getting lost in kind of like the negative chatter of my brain or the pitfalls and traps of anxiety and stress and toxic comparison to others, or the why am I not at this place yet and why isn't this happening, that's one of my main struggles mentally, and it has been for years. So in utilizing psilocybin, though, I've noticed, and I noticed when I first started using it, that I was able to separate myself from those thoughts a lot easier, and become a conscious observer of those thoughts instead of becoming those thoughts and having those thoughts kind of control me in those moments. I could observe them, and that allowed me to step away from those thoughts and watch them kind of drift through, as if it's like a leaf drifting in through a window of a house and then out through another one. And that that tool of becoming like a conscious observer of thoughts in that moment, I try to mirror that into comedy and creativity. So if I'm writing a joke or a video or working on a project or whatever, I try to step back mentally from the page or the thought and navigate it different and challenge myself with different things. Like, what if this happened or this happens? It gets a little, it's weird to vocalize it because I like never talk about it. So I'm like trying to find the words to explain. And it probably sounds like I'm high right now, which I'm not. Am I? Who knows? But it's, psychedelics have helped me with creativity in a really cool way because they've allowed me to find new ways to navigate an idea in the same way that I've navigated different thought patterns in my brain. Like I just explained, I can also navigate different creative ideas. And, psychedelics are trippy as hell. I mean, psilocybin is nuts. It's so silly. It's so fun. Depending on the set and setting, of course, and use it properly and all the things. But the way that I think when I'm using it is different than if I was just approaching a joke or a piece of writing or a project without it. I don't know. Is that answering the question at all?
It totally
is. I'm trying.
No, it was actually really cool to listen to because the impact that comedy has on people, like the point that I'm basically trying to make is the impact that comedy has on your brain and the ability to like step outside of a situation, look at it from this observer effect. If it's an issue that you're thinking about that you feel very politically charged on or whatever it is, there's something you feel strongly about, it creates a softening and enables you to step outside of the self for a moment, look at it from multiple different angles all at once. And that's really what you're talking about with your own thoughts. And so there's so many beautiful parallels and crossover there. I don't know, the example that came to me while you were talking, I don't know if you've seen this. Have you seen the studies or the reports? There was a headline, I think it was around a year ago, where this guy who had very, racist ideologies did a psilocybin trip, or sorry, it might have been MDMA or psilocybin. I can't remember which one. But after that experience, he no longer identified as a racist and realized that his perspectives had shifted. And there's a lot of nuances to that situation. And that's not something that happens 100% of the time.
Sure.
And it's not the cure-all, but I think it speaks volumes to the expansion that can happen from these experiences. And there's thousands and thousands of examples of things like that.
Yeah.
And it's cool to hear your experience of expanding your own mind in the way that you approach your own mental health and your comedy and your work, because that probably comes through in the way that your work resonates with people. I would love to hear, you said you've been microdosing for the last few years. I think people would be really curious. The thing that changed my mind about psychedelics was looking at people that I really respected.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it was in the world of creativity, athletics, business, and hearing how they integrated it into their life and how it first came into their world. Because I'm assuming you didn't start taking psychedelics when you were born. I'm assuming your brain thought about it one way.
No, even though when you're a baby, you're basically tripping on DMT the entire time. Yeah,
same brain state. But I'm curious how it came into your world.
So I didn't even smoke weed through high school. First time I smoked weed, I was 18, and it gave me a headache, and I didn't like it, and didn't smoke again until I was like late in college. But then after college, I started going to music festivals, like transformational, like hippie desert music festivals, with a good buddy of mine. And that was fun because it kind of reconnected me with a piece of my life that I had not tapped into in a long time. When I was really young, my mom took me to Grateful Dead shows, and I was like the hippie
Hence
baby
the
running around. Yeah. And like Reggae on the River up in Northern California, and all these hippie fests. And it was great. It was awesome. And I loved it. And I was the little tie-dye shirt baby running around eating organic applesauce. And so when I started going to like Lightning in a Bottle in 2016, I think was the first year I went to that festival. And then there were other ones called, like Totality or Alignment Festival of Unity or whatever. Lucidity is another one. I love Lucidity. Started going to those in the mid 2010s, and that kind of reconnected me with that sense of spirituality that I hadn't tapped into in a while. And I did LSD for the first time at one of those festivals with my friend, and it was incredible. It blew my brain open. I was like, whoa, this exists? This type of thinking exists? This type of, am I like crossing over dimensions here? I was seeing crazy things, the lights. It was nuts. So it was a combination of doing and being initiated into the practice of working with psychedelics in a really mindful way. So when I did LSD with my friend, it wasn't just like, bro, here's a tab, like do this now, let's go, like let's go find chicks and fucking yeah. It was, we put intention into it, we sat with it, and he really like stewarded me in a really nice way into the practice of working with different substances and medicines like that. So it was a combination of that guidance mixed with, learning about what other people were doing in the space. Aubrey, who's a friend now, other people like this organization Vets, this company Black Rifle Coffee that I've done a lot of work for. They work with an organization that sends veterans with PTSD overseas for psychedelic assisted therapy. So I started learning about psychedelics for therapeutic use. And that was a huge tick in my knowledge of what these things could do and how they could help the world and different people on podcasts. And it was just an amalgamation of all these things. And then slowly started practicing with different substances over the past like 10 years. So I'm very new in my journey and my relationship with different medicines and substances. But it's always been very intentional, and it's super fun to party for sure. But first and foremost, I built a pretty strong foundation of trust and respect for the different substances and for myself and for the process of working with them. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the way you describe it. And I think I had listened to another episode of you talking where you were talking about your intentionality behind using these substances and the frequency in which you use them. And it sounds like you're really selective when that happens. And so right now, would you say you do, a few larger doses a year and then you microdose on a more regular basis, or like what does your current protocol look like?
It's so not structured. I couldn't even give like a schedule. I'm going to Burning Man in a couple weeks. I'll tell you that. But yeah, I try not to abuse stuff, like I know some people who do a lot all the time, and that's not for me. And it's different for everybody. Some people might sit in an ayahuasca ceremony once, having never done anything, and that's the only thing that they'll ever do, and it's got a profoundly positive impact for them. I know somebody who's sat in over 50 ayahuasca ceremonies and treats it as somewhat of a social event. And there's medicine in that, but there's also the potential for abuse in similar situations if you're constantly ingesting a substance without, and that's not what this person was doing, but without like the intentionality or the respect for it. There's a lot more than just doing it for me. So it's hard to like put it to a schedule, and I also don't want people to know how often I do drugs, but it's not super often at all.
I think there's a really good satire.
Hi guys, taking a brief second away from the show to tell you a little bit about our sponsor. Supermush is our brand inspired by the 60s and 70s that makes the most delicious and effective functional mushroom supplements. Our newest and best-selling products are Sex, Energy, and Sleep Gummies. They're sugar-free, they're delicious, and for listeners of this podcast, we have a special discount code for you. It's ITM15, and if you want to try our gummies, use ITM15 at checkout. You can find all these products at supermush.com.
I think there's a really good satire video in there about taking your first date to ayahuasca, given that it's a social activity. Definitely not something you want to do. No, but I think it's cool for, when people ask me that question, my answer is somewhat similar, and it sounds like we engage with these things in a similar manner. And I'm a huge fan of microdosing. So we started a whole organization, and microdosing I do take like a supplement. And so one of the things that's been the coolest for me to have awareness around over the last few years is one of the major pitfalls I've seen people step into with psychedelics is more is better. And I have found so much benefit in just microdosing. And so that is like the main thing that I use psychedelics for. And it's a sub-perceptual amount. I'm on a microdose right now. You wouldn't know. It's something that I use for work. And it's also stacked with a ton of other functional mushrooms, which I want to talk to you about as well. Because a lot of times when people are experiencing this massive benefit from microdosing, they're also not realizing they're getting a huge amount of benefits to their brain from the functional mushrooms, from the lion's mane and the cordyceps. And so when you and I had this conversation a few weeks ago, because I have a fully legal functional mushroom company, Supermush is fully legal, even though it's branded all 60s and 70s and psychedelics. And you were like, oh, I thought it was psilocybin originally. A lot of people do think that. But you shared with me that you love functional mushrooms. And so I'd love to hear about how those make their way into your life as well.
Functional mushrooms are awesome. I love mushrooms just in general. My family's Italian. I was raised eating mushrooms in the kitchen, and mushrooms have so many uses. It's insane. Like Paul Stamets does such cool work with mushrooms, and he's created so many opportunities for people to learn about how they can improve their health with mushrooms just from the store. I have droppers that I use in smoothies. I have the gummies now, thank you, that I use every day. And there's so much research behind it too. It's not one of these things that's going to be chalked up as another health fad, a health phase. It's in culture. It's real life use. Lion's mane for cognition, and reishi for chilling, and cordyceps for cognitive focus and energy, and it's great. And mushrooms are fantastic. So I'm stoked that you're putting more of them into the world. I love them. Great. I think they're great.
I love that. And I always tell people too, if they're listening to our show, like if you were interested in starting working with psychedelics, it's an amazing idea just to start with functional mushrooms.
Yeah.
Not even as just a gateway, a gateway substance by any means, because I like to think about if you were to just put the whole world's brain on lion's mane, how remarkably better of a planet that would be, because it does very similar things to your brain chemistry as far as, cognition, memory function, sleep. There's all these incredible benefits, and they're also ancient wisdom. They've been used for thousands of years.
Yeah.
Our Western world has picked them up and, modernized them, and we're really just reintegrating them into our diet.
Have you ever had lion's mane, like as solid?
Yeah. Like, I cut it up and make little steaks with it.
Yeah, that's what I do. Yeah. Just cook it in a little bit of butter.
And it's different, right? If you, to get a little nerdy here for a second, if you extract the mushrooms, super mush, we have gummies. So you're not just putting the raw mushroom into the gummy. You're extracting it through hot water and alcohol. And it's this, detailed process. And then you're turning it into a powder, and then you liquefy it and then put it into a gummy. Yeah. And the extraction process is what gives you the most nutrients for your body, essentially. So a little tidbit on that. But I love that you're such a fan of them.
Huge fan.
Another topic I wanted to talk to you about, because actually my roommate who you just met, Jesse, him and I chat about this somewhat frequently, because he was one of the first people on YouTube, and his career blew up on the internet, and all of a sudden he shifted into this energy of all, his worth being dictated by likes. And there's a shadow side of being a creator on the internet where you have this massive following online. And I think that in the world of comedies, one of the things that's the most interesting is the shadow side of it. And there's so much interesting stuff there, where you look at some of the most profound comedians on the planet and their mental health being, low to the point where they ended their lives. And it's interesting, right? Because the purpose of their work is to help lift the spirits of other people. Yeah. So I'm curious what your thoughts on the shadow side of comedy, and specifically as it relates to mental health of the comedians.
Yeah, it's I think all artists have maybe all artists have some type of shadow side of their life and career and creativity that they grapple with. In comedy, it's really easy to fall into the trap of comparison that I mentioned earlier, right? It's really easy. Somebody once said, don't spend too much time looking over your fence at somebody else's backyard, because then you won't be able to tend to your own flowers. Something like that. I'm ruining the quote, and I forget who it was, but it's kind of artistic.
It's now a new quote that
new quote that I made up. It's way less poetic, but you get the gist. I wrestle with that a lot, and I've accepted that I might always have a piece of that in me. I'm super competitive. I'm unhealthily competitive. It got into me watching Michael Jordan growing up, and then it got into me more being around Kobe Bryant, and just always being such a sports fan and playing basketball my whole life. And that there's a very fine line for me between competition and comparison. And in my personal experience, I've been trying to reframe the thoughts that get me trapped in states of negative comparison. Why am I not getting that thing? I've been doing it this long, and this person that long, and they're getting that, and I'm not getting that, and I can't do this, and why haven't I gotten that, and what da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm trying to reframe that and focus instead on what I do have, because it's just easy, especially in comedy when you're solo. When you're a solo performer and solo artist, it's easy to see other solo artists doing all these amazing things that you thought you would be doing. And so I just constantly try to reframe and focus on what I have, what I'm doing, what I'm excited about now, instead of just letting myself kind of veer off into negative land. And psychedelics have been a big help with that. But psychedelics are just a tool. They're not a crutch. So breath work has also helped with that. Meditation has helped with that. Eating super healthy, working out. There's so many other tools that can be used to better your mental health Therapy, of course, obviously, sauna, cold plunge, whatever. Everybody has different things, different tools. But yeah, that it's easy to get stuck in a rut of toxic comparison. Then that's my experience. There's so much more to like that shadow side of and the darkness of being like a creator, being in entertainment in general. Because another thing is being in entertainment, you're not stable. Very rarely is somebody, I'm not stable at all. I feel like I'm flailing like 90% of the time. I don't know where the next paycheck's going to come from. I don't know what it looks like watching my page on Instagram, but I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I have no fucking idea. And I'm really trying to figure it out. And I think, and I've started within the past couple of years to realize that that's a kind of a shared belief between people, not just in entertainment in the lane that I'm in, but across all industries, across the world. Humans are just trying to figure out how to be a human and how to be a human the next day too. And that thought of being connected to others through that stressor of that I just described, the stressor of not being where you want to be or not knowing what's next or not having stability. That's kind of helped ground me in a big way too. So, you're doing great. You're doing a great job. If you're listening to this, you're doing a great job. And I think, remind yourself of that more often because that's what I try to do.
And we're all winging it.
We're all winging it.
My favorite entrepreneurs that are leading the biggest companies and doing all the things they are like, we are winging it. We have no idea what we're doing. Still, I think that's a never ending thing.
And it's funny how it looks like people know what they're doing. Some people might know what they're doing, but I've met a lot of people and it looks like they know what they're doing on the outside and they have no idea. They're kind of just going with it. And that is 100% me. I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. And I'm so trying to figure it out. And I'm grateful to be surrounded by some really incredible people and community that want to see me win as much as I want to see them win. And I think that's a big, important part of it too, is surrounding yourself with people that want to see you win.
Yeah, it's the ultimate psychological safety.
Yeah.
It's a term that my friend group passes around a lot. And, the reality of that statement is all of these big ideas and things and creative pursuits, they really start to expand massively when you feel seen and loved by the people, immediate closest people to you. And that's a flag because I want to talk about love and relationship and how psychedelics have impacted that. So I'm planting that seed. But one of the things you said that triggered something for me was, you said something as a crutch. And then my mind went to using comedy as a crutch and realizing that I do that. And I'm curious, a lot of the funniest people I know, I'll just speak for myself rather. I specifically in times of grief will find myself laughing about something that is really painful. But on one hand, I love that about myself because being able to laugh and cry in the same sentence, I think is the most beautiful part of the human experience and just shows range and depth and all of that. And it's often sometimes a crutch. And I'm reflecting on moments in my life where it's something really painful. So the appropriate emotion would be tears. Yeah, I find myself laughing at the absurdity of it. And I'm curious if you also, being a comedian, use comedy as a crutch in times of pain.
Yeah, I mean, so when I say the term crutch, it's like that would be something that is used maybe when it shouldn't be used. And I think comedy can be used anytime. I'm fully of the mind that nothing is off limits. It's never too soon for anything. No topic is off limits ever, no matter what the topic is, as long as the intention is laughter and joy and not like shock value or making somebody feel bad or something like that. So that's my opinion. I use comedy, I wouldn't say as a crutch, but more as a tool. Sometimes it's a coping mechanism. If something bad is happening to a family member or friend, in the right time, I'll try to make a little joke out of it. My brain doesn't know any different. I try to make a joke out of everything. So yeah, I think there's a time and a place for comedy to be used, and that time is anytime, and that place is anywhere. And as long as it's like with the intention to inject joy into the situation, you know?
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I was watching another video of yours. I really stalked you deeply on the
Thank you so
internet.
much.
And you said
I'm glad.
something-
Also, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it was great. I loved it. And the most hilarious thing is that Brent is coming back here tomorrow to film an Alien video. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. This podcast will be out by the time the Alien video out is, I'm sure. But this wasn't an Alien video, but it was when you were talking about aliens and death, which are two of my favorite topics. So I'm sure we have a lot in common in that sense. But you shared, I wrote it down because I wanted to make sure I repeated accurately.
Do you remember the video?
Accurately. It was a podcast you did.
Oh, it was a podcast.
Yeah, it was like a recent one you did.
Okay.
You were sitting on a chair.
Cool.
Super helpful context. You said, when asked about death, basically that we're all going to die and the earth will eventually be swallowed by the sun. And
it actually won't be swallowed by the sun. It'll break apart into a billion little tiny pieces, because the sun's gravity will be so strong that it'll just rip it into bits. And then all of those pieces will burn and evaporate into the sun. And then the sun will get that energy as it continues to grow. And then it will explode, creating a supernova that can be seen from across the universe.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for clarifying.
You're welcome.
That is where we're headed. And I think the intent of that beautiful future narrative was to really put into perspective our perceived failures, and that's the kind of the context that you're using it in.
Yeah.
And it is, what I appreciated about it is, you know, one of the narratives that's pervasive right now in mainstream, especially this wellness culture, is the pursuit of trying to extend our life, trying to escape death, which I have a lot of interesting thoughts around, and I do a lot of thinking and writing about. And I'm curious what your relationship is with death. Now that I have more color on exactly what's going to happen in your mind with the sun and all of that.
Yep.
But what is your relationship with death?
So I've never met death. Actually, I have. I think I met death. I thought I met death. Pretty chill guy.
Via psychedelics? Or
yeah. I had a whole death experience when I sat in the ayahuasca ceremony last year, which maybe on a different podcast we'll get into. It's a bit much for today. Yeah. The thought of death is simultaneously terrifying and like extremely calming to me. And I tend to go back and forth because what you just brought up, that example that I talked about, was something along the lines of like managing stresses and trying not to let yourself get too down, because at the end of the day, if your credit card bill is super high and you don't know how you're going to pay it, don't worry about it. You'll figure it out. And then one day you'll die, and the person who was bugging you to pay it back, they'll die, and their bones will go back into the earth and be swallowed by worms, who will then die.
Mushrooms will eat them.
And mushrooms will eat the worms, and then the mushrooms will grow, and the spores will release into the air, which is continuing to get polluted, and then the earth will suffocate and get drawn into the sun and explode into a billion pieces, and there will be no trace of humanity left across the entire universe. So don't worry about your credit card bill. Like, take your time. You'll be fine.
Go to Erewhon, buy the smoothie. Spend $32. So that's like where that thought process came from, and that's a type of reminding that I do to myself whenever I'm feeling low or stressed. And it helps me kind of put into perspective that this micro stress in this one day is not defining my life, and it's not going to have a big impact on me. I'm going to it's not like I'm ignoring it. It's not a passive thought. It's actually an active thought, because it puts me into an active state of, like moving through that moment of stress. If that makes sense. But death is weird. It's weird. My relationship with death is like, it's weird. It's a weird thing to think about, that we're not going to be around one day. That's crazy. You're Allie. You're always going to be here. I'm Brent. I'm always going to be talking shit about everybody and making videos about, spiritual people named Solstice that have flower life tattoos on their nipples. I'm always going to be doing that. But the reality is I'm not. And that's a strange thing to think about. So, a lot of people have different thoughts on what happens after you die and if there's an afterlife. And my theory has always been the afterlife is whatever you leave on Earth.
that's kind of how I operate with a perspective towards death. Is whatever you leave behind is the afterlife. That's the energy, the literal energy that you leave, the memories that you leave in somebody's mind, the stories that they then tell somebody else, the physical creation that you leave behind, the property that you leave behind, the things that you did that have a ripple effect on people after you die. That's the afterlife. So I'm just trying to create as much joy as I can so that my afterlife is dope for people and not a bummer.
I think you've already had 500 million hits of that, of joy.
Trying, yeah.
And, I would love to actually hear what I don't know if you have an internal mission statement or something that you're working towards, but what is your, mission and the way you make decisions around what to do and what not to do? We had, a conversation around this with even what brands you're looking to partner with, but what is, in the world of what you're hoping to create with that in mind, that your afterlife is the legacy you'll leave on the planet.
Yeah, the mission is joy. The mission is, I made it a point like 4 or 5 years ago to not leave mean comments on things, or like to not, like, on the internet. And not that I did. I wasn't like a troll, but even in a joking way. That this is a micro example of it. If it doesn't put joy out into the world, then I'm not going to do it if it doesn't align with that. So anything from like leaving a comment on a video, to going to an event, to working with a brand or a partner, to choosing what project I'm going to green light for myself next. The mission is and always will be, how can this add to the overall amount of happiness in the world? Is it just going to make one person smile? Cool, that's great. Maybe that person smiles and goes and makes somebody else smile that's pretty bummed because I didn't know the Erewhon smoothie was $32. I thought it was $24, so now they're bummed.
I think it might be with like a modifications thing.
Right, with the modifications thing. Yeah, don't get the whipped marshmallow cream. So like, can I affect that person who can affect that person, and the butterfly effect can continue? And so I'm trying to create a platform and curate an audience and a community to allow for as much joy to come out of my mind, body, and soul as I can. And that's the mission. That's the goal.
You're doing an amazing job of that.
I'm trying.
Being in your presence brings me joy.
Thanks.
And I would love to talk about one more topic before we close out. This has been such a cool conversation. Cool. I met you with your girlfriend, your partner, and she's wonderful, Natalie.
Yeah.
And I met her at Aubrey's Ranch, where I met you. And in my brief observation of your relationship, I felt like there was a lot of love there. And I felt like you guys had such a special energy together. And one of my favorite topics and things to talk about, like I just had Gabby Reese on the show, and she was talking about her and Laird, who's this amazing big wave surfer. They're just like an epic power couple.
Yeah, they're dope.
Between the two of them. And she was talking about, they have a microdosing practice that they started together, and talking about the influence of psychedelics, even in a subperceptual way, how it's impacted their relationship. And I'm curious how psychedelics have, not even you doing them with your partner, but how they've evolved your perspective around love, and anything that you feel is relevant to add there with just how they've enhanced your relationship.
Sure. Yeah. I'd say one of the biggest enhancements of our relationship has been connecting with our close community, and how psychedelics have played a role in that is certain substances are much more of a heart-to-heart connection versus others that are maybe a brain connection, or versus others that are maybe an introspective connection into oneself, right? So like the latter of that, an introspective connection into oneself, is probably like ayahuasca. For me, a brain connection type of thing might be LSD, and a heart opening connection, it might be something along the lines of MDMA. So we've been to quite a few events with other people and had different types of journey experiences in a ceremony setting that have been really profound and sometimes really hard, like not in our relationship, but hard personally to go through. She had a pretty tough experience at a music festival a couple years ago, but I had been in the position that she was in, so I was able to kind of help guide her through that experience. And she came out the other side like grateful that she had the experience, and that was really cool. So it's built a lot of trust. It's also created a lot of room for play and a lot of fun, and it's especially within a community setting because we can go deeper in conversations with people while working with a certain substance than and in a certain setting, like at a festival setting or a ranch in the middle of Texas, then maybe we would at having coffee at Cafe Gratitude in Venice. Not that that's not a psychedelic place on its own, but
I think they might be serving some psychedelics
probably
on the off menu, back menu.
You just got to ask for the right
you're
stuff.
You're not ordering the right things.
Yeah. So it's helped us develop a really deep sense of trust in each other and in ourselves, which then, both of those things inform each other. The more trust I have in myself, the more trust I have in the relationship and in her. And it's been great. Yeah. There's so much more to that. That's a whole other episode on its own too. But, I think psychedelics for relationships are, they're a really cool tool. I know a lot of people, I met this couple in their 70s and they'd been together for like 60 years. And they said a big part of their relationship was like every 3 months they do a huge dose of MDMA out at the desert or at home or whatever. And it's therapeutic because it really allows you to break through barriers that you might have regarding different topics of conversation or approach different, share different ideas that you might not share otherwise. So yeah, just on a basic level of trust building, it's created a really cool foundation.
MDMA was originally used for couples therapy when it was created, and Rick Doblin came on our podcast, and the way he described, I really recommend if anyone's listening to this and you're interested in MDMA, he does such a beautiful job, obviously because of his 40 years of work with MAPS, describing the impact of what MDMA does to your system. And I had shared with him that because I actually recently did a MDMA session with my boyfriend.
Cool.
And it's such an incredible experience because it feels like whatever prison glass walls that are invisible that you're speaking through around a certain topic, it removes, and things that were so sticky and charged and aggressive just become interesting and beautiful so quickly.
Yeah.
And you're able to get to the root of what's actually happening much, much quicker and actually hear the person. And regardless of whether you're doing it for just deepening your connection or really there's like, a sticking point. The reason why it was used with therapy, with couples therapy, was these couples were unable to have deeper conversations, and using the substance in a adjacent with therapy enabled them to go so much deeper. So it's amazing. And, the unfortunate news, which I'm sure you've been paying attention to, by the time this podcast is released, it's already all over the internet, but people will be more aware of its impact. But the FDA declined MDMA as a breakthrough therapy drug, despite this incredible body of evidence that's been built. And there's a lot of information coming out about why that happened, how that happened, and what the next steps are. Part of what I'm really inspired by on the back end of that news is because it opens up a whole other pathway. It's going to ignite so many more people to action and proving that we need to pay attention to other pathways to legalize psychedelics. And one of the ways that I really feel like that happens is through the mainstreaming and the destigmatization of them, in a large part through comedy.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful for all the work that you're doing, because I think it's going to play a much bigger role than you even realize based on the amount that's needed to shift the cultural narrative.
Totally.
So I'm really grateful for all of the things that you're doing.
Thanks.
And all of the satire around spirituality and psychedelics. And I can't wait to see the Burning Man videos that you come out with after this.
Yeah, I got to make an FDA video too. It's there's a lot going on with that, but at the end of the day, it's really, really, really hard to break through a corrupted system.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I did a podcast with Rick, and he was super jazzed. About a year ago, we were talking about fun brand names for MDMA prescribed medications, and I was pitching him brand names. And here we are a year later thinking it was a home run. And it's just a bummer. It's a bummer, but the path is still there. It's not a no forever. And, there's so many different people get life-changing benefits from working with different substances outside of the pharmaceutical industry and the mainstream Western health industry. So it's only a matter of time before all of these things come onto the market, prescribed, or, MedMen for psilocybin is probably next up in the next 5 to 10 years. Hopefully they do it right and with respect to the substances. But yeah, it's crazy to see. But I got a lot of hope for where it's going too. So, and I appreciate what you're doing also, because you're making a lot of good stuff happen.
There's a lot of education that's needed around like what that model looks like. And I very much feel that the future of this space most of it is in the consumer world and the market. So I'm excited about the stuff that we're doing with our nonprofit, because it's focused on consumer product legalization. Basically, if you haven't taken it through a clinical therapeutic way, which I've taken psychedelics both ways, and there's this whole underground market, and there's such a need to make that safer and more accessible. And so it's a whole other wild world. But I'm inspired. Despite all that news. Is there anything else that you didn't get to say that you wanted to say as it relates to topics of psychedelics, mushrooms, and then I'd love you to share what's coming up for you next?
Yeah, the one last thing I'll say about the intersection, I guess, between psychedelics and creativity is a lot of people think of creativity just as the art that you produce, right? Poetry, music, film, painting, whatever. But creativity is so much more than that. It's so much more than just producing art. It's also creative problem solving. It's creative thinking. It's creatively navigating through a challenge in your life. It's whether that's in career, relationship, health, anxiety, stress. And psychedelics have the power to be a really useful tool to people who haven't found benefit from other tools. A friend of mine named Laura Dawn does a ton of great work. Do you know Laura? Have you ever met Laura? She's
like done speaking stuff with our nonprofit around microdosing, because she's a huge into microdosing as well.
She's dope. And she first started getting me aware of what that space is like, the intersection between psychedelics and creativity. So there's just so much more for people to learn about that topic. It's such an incredible topic, and it's got such a awesome power to help people become creative in their own lives, and not creative in the sense of producing art, but creative, like approaching different aspects of their life creatively. So and I'm excited to see where the space goes from here and how people benefit from it in the long run, because the world needs, I think the world needs to do a big head of mushrooms. I do. I think that's the goal. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. And I got shows, brentpella.com/shows. And Brent Pella on all the things.
So anything else that if people are following your page and you're doing more live stuff, what's things that people should be looking at, more alien content? Like, what are you really excited about?
So many things. Shows are all over the place and get scheduled sporadically. So brentpella.com/shows to check out where I'm on tour next. Videos pretty much every day on Instagram and YouTube at Brent Pella, and just trying to put some more happiness out there,
You create a lot of joy in the world.
Thanks.
I can't wait to keep consuming all of your content.
Cool.
The last question we ask everyone, given the nature of this podcast, is what is the most important lesson that mushrooms have taught you, or psychedelics in general? But what is the one key takeaway?
Relax. Chill the fuck out. It's going to be fine. You're okay. You're doing fine. That's the message that comes through pretty much every time. And I try to meditate on that, and I try to hold it tight, because it's true. You're doing a great job.
You're doing a great job.
And I don't think we tell each other that enough. You're doing a great job.
You too, Matrix.
Yeah.
Everyone here doing an amazing job. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to be friends and for you to film an alien video at my house tomorrow.
Thank you so much for that. Very stoked.
For what we're recording too. We're recording another thing with you, which is like a massive Brent Pella week for Super Much. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Cool.
And we'll see you soon.
Appreciate you.
Thanks for diving into the multiverse with us. If you're interested in being a featured guest on the show, sponsorship, partnership, or you're just mushroom curious, we're always looking to expand our mycelium network. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Into the Multiverse, where you can find clips from this podcast, psychedelic legalization news, events that we're doing, and so much more. We've also created our own in-house consumer lifestyle brand called Super Mush. We make mushroom mouth sprays. We make a whole line of mushroom streetwear. You can find it on Instagram at Supermush or online at supermush.com. We'll see you next week. Much love.